Hey everybody, and welcome back to Lots of Stories. I'm back here with one of my favorite storytellers, Will. How's it going, Will?
Good, good. Thanks for having me on.
It's a pleasure. I love hearing Will's stories. They're, some of my favorite ones are really lovely personal stories about marriage and relationships, and that's always, I think, such a wonderful thing in life, and also sometimes hard to navigate, so I appreciate your perspective on it.
Hard stories to tell sometimes too. Yeah, I started off mostly telling stories about my teenage years, which is, maybe it's hard for some people. It's easy for me because I'm so far removed from it. I've only done a few stories about more recent years of being married, so you've just been lucky to hear them, I guess. But yeah, they're good ones to tell. They're sometimes tough too. Yeah. And
you have a show coming up about teenage stories, correct?
Yeah, with a couple other students of the same teacher that we shared. We're doing a show. It's called Awkward Teenage Years. It's all just us being awkward in our teenage years. Exactly what the title says. Yeah.
That sounds great. I have been thinking about since seeing about your show. I've been thinking about some of my awkward teenage years stories and whether I'd be ready to tell them or not. And
I hope you are, because we hope we're going to make it a recurring show at some point if we ever find a home for it or whatever. So you'll have to come and do it.
All right, I have a really awkward one, so...
Perfect.
Perfect.
More awkward the better, yeah.
Oh, I'm blushing already. All right, well, we're going to get well started. We're playing with format today here at Lots of Stories, so I'm going to pick the words. So the first word for Will's story is going to be miracle. M-I-R-A-C-L-E. Okay, and the second word is going to be... mute. M-U-T-E. All right, now pick a triangle.
Okay, let's go with this squiggly line right here.
This squiggle. We've been calling it a squiggle, and someone recently called it a snake. And
yeah, I could see that too.
That's exciting too.
Yeah.
Okay, a story about risk.
A story about risk, miracle, mute.
Yeah.
Okay.
I will disclose to the audience that the reason that mute was on my mind is we had some technical difficulties with our microphones, but we're back and you can hear us now. So, all right, we're going to give Will a moment to think, and then we're going to hear a great story about risk.
Okay.
No pressure.
When I was 14 years old, my parents sent me off to Wyoming on a trip for a month to go hiking in the wilderness. I found out later this trip is mostly for kids who were having a rough time in their teenage years. They, by and large, I should say, were involved in like drinking or drugs or just other things that we definitely shouldn't have been involved in yet. And so this trip was under the guise of being a leadership building trip, but really it was to keep us clean for a month and then teach us about the outdoors and nature. So I was the youngest kid on the trip. A lot of them were, 17, 18 years old. So being 14 was a little bit weird in that environment, but it also meant that it was like more physically difficult for me than it was for everybody else. We had to carry very heavy packs because we'd go out into the wilderness for like 7 days at a time and camp and cook our own food and do all kinds of, camping stuff, which I'd never done before in my life. But I actually found that I really enjoyed it during the first 7-day expedition, and then we came back to civilization, if you will, and spent a couple of days outside of a town at a real campground with showers and whatnot. And then we went on our second 7-day expedition, in which we're going to be climbing up a very tall, hiking up a very tall mountain, and at the top it was something like 9,000 feet, and so the weather changes very drastically when you get up to a height like that, which I did not know. And as we got closer and closer to the summit, we got stuck in a blizzard. And there were probably 12 of us together on this. There were a couple of older folks, like actual adults, who were leading the expedition, and then the rest of us teenagers. And we all had rain gear with us for something like this. But I didn't really get mine out fast enough, and so all my clothes got really wet. It was also very cold. And I put all the rain gear on eventually, and I kept hiking, but I got very, very cold, like as cold as I've ever been, and the blizzard and the wind is just, pounding us as we're getting up to where we finally had to make camp before we got to the summit. And I was apparently, I don't really remember this very well, but according to everyone else who was there, acting very strangely while we were trying to eat dinner that night. Like I was just kind of really loopy and out of it. I couldn't really hear people when they were talking to me. And so the counselors then decided that, they needed to hustle me to bed. So they got me like stripped out of my wet clothes. I'm down to just my long underwear and into my sleeping bag. And then they were throwing like blankets on top of me. And I remember waking up in the middle of the night though with flashlights like shining into my eyes, and everyone kind of whispering in hushed tones and asking if I was okay, and just kind of waking up and freaking out, having no idea where I was, because I was somewhere in the middle of Wyoming. I still don't really know exactly where I was, but I slept for almost 14 hours that night, and I woke up the next morning, and I couldn't really recall everything that had happened since we'd gotten to the campsite. And it turned out that I had a case of hypothermia, and once they'd recognized that, my symptoms, that's when they got me hustled into the sleeping bag to try to get me warmed up again. And I wouldn't say it was like miraculous that I survived, but it was a little touch and go there for a while. They were considering whether or not they're going to have to try to call in a helicopter to come and pick me up after the storm had passed. But I was young, and I guess I was strong enough to make it through that. So I didn't have to evacuate in the end. I kind of caught a little bit of a head cold, but we all hiked up to the summit the next day, and I saw some of the most amazing sights that I've ever seen in my life. We were way up above the tree line, up above the clouds, looking out for miles and miles. And as a 14-year-old, I don't think I realized the sort of danger that I was in. But as an almost 40-year-old now, I realize that's probably the closest that I've ever really come to dying. But I'm glad I didn't know it at the time, and I think it was probably worth it in the end.
Thanks, Will, for sharing that story. That sounds really scary, what you went through.
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't as scary at the time as it is in retrospect. But
isn't that interesting about like when you're young, things that like when you're older, like why would I have dared?
Yeah, I didn't really have a fear of death yet. I think when I was 14,
I know.
And everyone else around me was scared, but I think did a pretty good job of protecting me from it, aside from, when I woke up in the middle of the night and they were all freaking out a little bit. But
it's terrifying. It also reminded me of this TV show that I used to love watching. I think it was called Higher Ground, and it was the same thing. It was like troubled teens on a wilderness leadership program. And my mother was my principal in high school, and she would always try, she was trained as a social worker, and so she'd always try like different techniques to help students who would need different ways of learning. So I just thought that show was so exciting because I was like, look, these educators are trying so hard to reach these kids. Also, Hayden Christensen was one of the stars of the shows before he was in Star Wars, and then he blew up.
yeah, I have to watch that. I never heard of that.
Yeah, it was on what is now Freeform, but was ABC Family and Fox Family at different times. So I don't know what channel it was back then, but I enjoyed it. I like watching weird shows. I don't know, shows that people don't know too much about, but I was like, these people are going to be stars, and then he was. All right, my turn.
Okay. So I'm going to choose words for you now.
You're going to choose words for me.
Okay.
I'm glad I don't have to come up with words.
All right. First word is going to be change.
Change. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. CHANGE. Second word is going to be car.
Okay.
CAR.
All right, back to this combination. I'm going to go with the lightning.
Lightning. All right. A story about friendship.
Okay, a story about friendship, car, change. We shall see.
All right.
Okay. When I was in college, many of my peers did semesters or years abroad. And I didn't have a particular desire to go abroad, but I was debating whether I wanted to move to LA. because I was really interested in working in film. And I thought, let me just see what LA is like and if I'd maybe want to move there after graduation. So I spent a semester there, and I ended up deciding I did not want to move there. I made great friends. I really enjoyed my time there. I spent the fall semester there, so I really enjoyed the weather and that I didn't have to wear a coat when it was December. But I did not enjoy that you had to drive everywhere, because I went to school in Manhattan, and I loved that you could just like go downstairs if you wanted to get milk or dinner or whatever you wanted to do. That in New York, it's such a walking city, whereas in LA, you really had to drive absolutely anywhere to get anything, to see other human beings. It felt very it's a very spread out city, but in a way it felt confined to me, because to interact with other people was much more of a journey. So I decided I was just going to go back to New York and live in New York, which I did. But because I was spending 4 months there, my parents let me borrow their car. And on the way back, two of my best friends from college, Margot and Eve, flew out to LA, and we decided to drive back together. So we had this really long cross-country trip. We hadn't seen each other in a few months, but that totally didn't matter. I was so excited to see them. I think they were so excited to just like travel. I hope they were excited to see me too. And we had a really great time. I remember they flew into LA on Christmas Day, and we were standing like on this hill wearing t-shirts with the sun shining on us, and we were so excited. And we started the drive back to New York. We took the southern route because Eve did not want to go to Vegas, even though we were kind of debating whether we wanted to. We were really excited to see Arizona and New Mexico, so we did. But we didn't plan this trip so perfectly, because we ended up like driving a lot at night, and then we thought we'd drive a lot at night and see sights during the day, but then we were really tired in the day, and then we started driving more in the day and whatever. And we just didn't get to see as many sights as we wanted to. And by that point, I missed New York so much. Like, I just kind of wanted to be home, like in my own room, in my own space. You know, I'd been gone for 4 months. And even Margot were really excited to just like keep traveling. So even though I was having so much fun with them, and especially like Eve and I love art, so and she in particular really wanted to go to the Georgia O'Keeffe Museum in New Mexico. We did that. We went to Texas, but I don't eat meat, and at the time I wasn't eating fish, and there's like I had baked potatoes basically. And we just kind of like, we had a great time with one another. Margot and I did most of the driving. Actually, Margot did most of the driving, and she started hallucinating penguins on the road. It was crazy. We were probably 20 at the time and should have been more concerned about our safety, because we were pushing ourselves with the driving. But I was so happy I was so internally conflicted, because I was so happy for the three of us to be together again. And I so just wanted to be by myself at the same time. And one of the reasons that the two of them are such great friends is because they know that about me, and it doesn't, like, even though we might fight or bicker, like at the end of the day, they're both so accepting and understanding. So anyway, we ended up like making our way through Texas to New Orleans. We dropped Margot off in Philadelphia at her parents' house, and we looked at the atlas, like the map of all the places we had been, all the places we raced through, the different Denny's and other random places we stopped at for food. And it was so nice to just, for the three of us, just to sit next to each other, like knowing that we'd have the rest of winter break to relax, you know, at home quietly, but also knowing that we got a chance to be together. I didn't tell you that much about change, but the truth is, the change for me, now that I think about it, was realizing that I had friends who would like accept that I wanted to have my own space. Like, I don't think I knew that that friendships could really like support you in all your different moods, in all your different needs of togetherness and aloneness. And I loved being on that trip with them, and I loved being home. So that's my story about friendship and change and cars. I forgot to say that being in on a long road trip with people, you're in a confined space also. You can really get on each other's nerves, so you have to be real good friends to make it through.
I thought it was about change too, just going from New York to LA and back to New York.
Oh yeah.
It's a lot of change there.
That was a lot of change, and I remember when the new semester started, it was like, there was this one day in February where there was snow, and I had a morning film class, which in a way is the best, but it's the worst because you know you're about to fall asleep. It's winter and it's cozy and whatever. And I'm walking to class and it's snowing. And I was like, any other time I wouldn't love this day so much, but I was like, I'm back in New York. It was just like the day where I really felt like back at home in an exciting way.
I don't think anyone ever says that in February in New York.
No,
so,
it was I don't think I've said it since, but it was so exciting. And it was like the history of the producer class, which was like a strange class to be taking, I thought, but so interesting. And I don't know, I loved that trip, like, and they're still two of my closest friends to this day. And we definitely have certain snacks that we will always be eating in the car for the rest of our lives, probably together. And it's always nice to think about them. All right, well, Will, thanks so much for being on the show today.
Oh, sure. Thanks for having me. It's a lot of fun.
A lot of fun. And I'm excited to see what happens at Awkward Teenage Years.
Yeah, me too.
All right, take care.
All right.